My guest on the Mettle Minds podcast is Antoine Craig, who's a very accomplished Paralympian. He competed in the 2021 Paralympic trials where he got a silver medal and was an alternate for the Tokyo Paralympics. He competed at the 2019 Pan Am Games in Lima, Peru, and he has a host of other accomplishments that are probably too lengthy to mention for an introduction. Antoine competes in the 100 meters and the 400 meters, and it's great to be able to speak with you today. Thanks for joining me, Antoine.
Thanks for having me.
I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about your genetic progressive disease. I know you have retinitis pigmentosa, so maybe you can talk a little bit about what that is and when you first started to experience loss of vision.
Okay. Usually I try to explain it as simply as possible. Basically, my body fails to produce a protein that allows my retinas to stay alive. So they've been slowly dying off over time. So it creates like extreme tunnel vision, and over time it can kind of close. Particularly for retinitis pigmentosa, we usually don't go completely blind. That's what doctors have told me. But in my particular case, I have maybe some light sensory left, but I can't make out any faces like I used to maybe 2 years ago. So it's gotten significantly worse over time. And my experience, kind of navigating this has been, to be honest, it's been tough. It's not an easy kind of disease. I guess there are no easy diseases, no easy conditions, but this one in particular, I think the fact that it was such a slow loss of the vision, I think that kind of takes its toll on you, because I think for me, I would rather it had just kind of gone immediately, so that way I can just get over the fact of the loss. But you're just like losing, you're kind of anticipating the loss, and it creates I don't know, it just kind of wears on you after time. And I think once I did lose my vision, I did have this, initial kind of reaction like of sadness, and you go through all the stages of grief. But afterwards, I felt better, like significantly better, because I was out of that kind of like lull, that I was in with it. So it was just something that was like, there was a finish line, and I was able to okay, I know where I am now. I know how to move forward. So instead of me wishing that it didn't leave,
Right. So did that make it easier almost when you completely lost your vision in terms of coping?
Significantly, because then I could focus on just enjoying, because there's still part of you that no matter how well adjusted you are, there's always going to be a part of you that's going to wish this wasn't happening to you, right? You're going to wish that you don't lose your vision. You always have that fear in the back of your head, like, oh no, I'm going to lose my vision. I'm about to lose my vision. And that's the hardest thing to deal with in the world, because you're not focusing on anything else. So too much of your mental capacity is just focused on that one thing, and you can't really devote your resources to, accomplishing goals like make it to the Paralympics.
Sure. So when did you first experience deterioration in your vision? How old were you?
I would say, to be honest, like hindsight being 2020, me looking back, and I've spent a fair bit of time this year just looking back on my childhood and some of the challenges that I had, even in school, not being able to see the chalkboard or not being able to see the book. And I remember specifically, like a professor told me, just like, everybody else can read this. Like, why can't you read this? Like, why can't you not? And at the time, at that age, you don't think about something's going on with you, right? You're the kid. So it's kind of up to your parents to recognize that you are having challenges, because you can't put into words what you're dealing with as a child. You're just dealing with stuff, and you're like, why am I different? You just want to be normal. So I would say maybe as early as middle school, I started having issues reading the chalkboard, needed to sit in the front of the class, things like that, low vision issues.
Yeah. Were you able to kind of articulate that, I guess, by the time you got to middle school, that you were having difficulties with your vision? Or explain that to others?
I wasn't. I really wasn't. It was something that I had a hard time with school. And I think this may be true for others. When you're in school, you just want to be normal. And if you're anything outside of normal, school is going to be hard for you. So I would hide those things that I couldn't see, or that I was struggling with stuff, or I was tripping over things. Like I would hide it. And I didn't think that I didn't recognize that it was a problem, right? I couldn't even like process that kind of like information that was going on with me. You just think something's happening, but you don't think it's anything wrong, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah. Just your comment, Antoine, that one of your teachers or professors had, indicated, that something was like, they were frustrated. It almost seemed that you seemed unable to read or perform tasks that other kids might be able to. Did that start to impact your experience, I guess, of just navigating the world?
Oh no, for sure. And I I began to realize, like, in school in particular, I started to kind of act out because I couldn't do those things. So I would almost want to be separated, because when I was what happened in school, like if I would act out and I was separated, they would make a printout of the homework, right? So then of the working class. So then I have to go to a different room, and then someone would have to like spend some time with me and kind of work with me on whatever we were working on. But and it's so crazy that would happen all the time. But like now that I know what I know now, I'm like, no. I really needed that individualized assistance, because I needed help working through like what I couldn't see. But I didn't know that that's what I was doing. But it was just happening automatically. But it's unfortunate that I would have to act out in class for me to get exactly what I needed.
Yeah.
Like, how do you verbalize that stuff as a kid? Like, hey mom, I think I got retinitis pigmentosa. Like, how old are you? 13, but I can spell this at this point, right?
Yeah. And so I guess those kinds of experiences, I guess, do you feel like it had some impact on your well-being as a youngster?
Yeah, because it created problems. It created so many problems in school. But luckily for me, that I had like many teachers or many people say like, Antoine, you're really smart. Like, you're so smart. Like, or they tell my mom like, oh my gosh, he's really smart.
Mm-hmm.
But I just couldn't get my work done. And it created this kind of like conundrum where I didn't even value school or education. So as I grew up, I just didn't even consider college as an option. I was one of those kids that was like, after high school, guess what I'm doing? I'm going to get a job. And I started working retail, and I started doing these different things because I struggled so much with school that I just completely rejected it.
Yeah.
So
would it be fair to say that the disease was limiting your potential?
No, for sure. It really limited me, because even when I started getting into the workforce, me and my brother, we had got like a summer job at Amazon, and it was just something we did. It seems like we'd just go work at Amazon for the summer, because they would always hire seasonal workers. And it was a fun job because like all your friends went. I know this sounds crazy, but this is what we did.
Yeah.
Because we would make a bunch of money just for the summer.
Right.
So my brother and I and some of our friends, we would kind of go in the warehouse, and I would realize like I could not see in there for the life of me, because they would have these huge like fluorescent lighting, and that's just the worst on my eyes. And everything was just so dark, and I just couldn't hardly even navigate. So even that, I couldn't do that the next summer, because I was just kind of freaked out by it, because I couldn't see. And it's just like there's forklifts everywhere. So even the jobs that I chose to do in my life, like, kind of limited me. I couldn't do everything my brother could do. And we were really close, so we would always do everything together, but I just couldn't do some of those jobs, some of those like warehouse jobs that did pay more money. I was just very limited to like retail jobs, to where I can control this space. Like, right, I could work on this computer and I could control this space. And that's what I did. I kind of just navigated the lack of vision I accommodated it for such a long time. But you're right, it definitely prohibited me from, going to school, further my education, and also finding higher paid jobs. It really did limit me.
Yeah. Was there a definitive point in time where you realized, okay, something's just not right with my vision, or was it just kind of a continual and progressive thing where eventually you had some recognition that something wasn't right?
So I had always, ever since I was around like 17, I was always going to a specialist in Georgia to get my eyes checked, and they were running all these tests and all these tests, and they couldn't figure anything out. And that kind of like discouraged me from keeping going, because it was these, the tests, they kind of wear on you after a while. I remember the last test I got, they stuck some what is it? It's like plant dye
Uh-huh.
into your veins,
Yeah.
and they had it through my veins, and they took pictures of my retinas, and that was a very painful procedure. And after that I was like, I would take a little break. So kind of fast forward a little bit, I was driving one night, and when it gets a little rainy outside and it's dark, it just becomes really, really hard. Even with my high beams, it gets really hard for me to kind of see 100%. I would say I'm probably about 70% of my ability to see. And this one night, traffic had kind of stopped in front of me kind of abruptly, and I tried to like hit on the brakes, but when it kind of happened fast, but it happened slow at the same time. I thought to myself, like, if I move over to the left lane, like there was oncoming traffic, so there was no space for me to kind of clear and not hit the car behind me, because I was moving too fast. Um, but I looked over to my right, and since I perceived it as being like very dark, I
Yeah.
couldn't see that like there was a huge like ravine there. So I chose, you know, what I thought was, the better option. And I kind of slammed on my brakes, and I yanked the steering wheel to the right to clear the car in front of me, so I didn't like slam into the back of them. And my car just went airborne.
Oh goodness.
And yeah, and then I landed inside of a river, so I couldn't get out the car. Like, shout out to General Motors, they saved my life. But I landed in this ravine, and the paramedics and everything, they had to like break my window and kind of rescue me outside of the river. I had to like stay in the car and do all these different things to like make sure like the water didn't flood in on me. And
Yeah.
it was just one of those moments where I realized, like, all right, it's time for me to stop driving. So after that, I stopped driving, even though I still had my license, because it takes a lot for them to kind of take your life.
I guess so, and not something to joke about, but was this in Georgia that you were? Sounds like
Yeah.
they have fairly lenient or lax rules in terms of driver's license, but it also sounds like, I mean, you're lucky to be alive from the sounds of it.
Yeah, for sure. That was one of the scariest moments in my life. One of the scariest moments in my life. And after that, that really scared me. And
Mm.
also, while I was at home, during that time, I saw this other there's another story, and you might not have heard about this, but it might have just only made it in Georgia. There's a young lady who was driving,
Yeah.
and she hit the back of a car on the highway, and that car swerved across onto the other side of the highway, and it took out like 7 or 8 cars.
Yeah.
And and sh- and she, sorry, my computer's
Oh,
doing
it's
something
fine.
crazy. Um, but she took out like 7 or 8 cars on that side, and then she ended up hitting like 4 or 5 cars, and it ended up killing like around 10 people, right? And the whole thing was because she didn't wear her glasses, and her mom tried to help her cover it up and get the car fixed. And then her dad at the time was deployed in the military,
Uh-huh.
and he gets home, and his wife and his daughter is now in jail because they try to cover up this
Yeah.
accident that his daughter had, all because she didn't want to wear her glasses.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
those two things happening to me reinforce the fact that I just need to, like, all right, sell my car and sit down.
Yeah.
And that's a hard decision, like, man, like, to stop driving. So I
Yeah.
feel like at that point it was the most responsible thing for me to do.
Right. So did you feel like your independence was being taken from you, or
Yeah. Yeah, significantly. And you remember, this is pre-Uber,
Yeah.
so uh,
Yeah.
it was tough because I had to rely on like cabs and friends just to get to work. And even at work, I was struggling because I was running into things more and more. And even my boss had to tell me, she was like, Antoine, you need to like take care of yourself. Like, this job is always going to be here. Like, you need to go figure out what's going on with your vision.
Yeah.
And that motivated me as well to like quit, because I was struggling with seeing the screen at this point because it was getting progressively worse. And now I can't, now I can't really function in the space with other people because I can't really see them. So
Yeah.
it was definitely a challenge.
Yeah. How did you cope with the progressive loss of your vision? Did you, or have you over time developed strategies?
So at first, I didn't know, it was like early in my psychology career. Um, so I've always been kind of resilient just by the nature of how I was raised. I'm the oldest of four. So I've never was allowed to wallow in my feelings because everybody else's feelings was way more important. I know it's like a simple way to put it, but that's essentially what happens to the oldest child, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's everyone else over you. So I've always had that mentality. So I never been one to be like, oh, woe is me.
Yeah.
But I did notice when I moved from Georgia to Virginia that it was really tough to be alone and kind of isolated. It was, and then not be able to see, and then you're worried about your friends like seeing you different. You're not cool anymore. You can't do these things anymore. Like so much of your identity is attached to uh, your ability to do your activities that you do and your friends and stuff.
Sure.
So
Sure.
that
Yeah.
impacted me significantly.
Yeah.
But I think once I found running, that helped me a lot. Like that, like my first race I ever ran was a mild race here in Virginia, and that was like one of the most impactful kind of like revelations of my life. Like that made everything kind of make sense.
Hmm. So I'm just curious. You said you moved from Georgia to Virginia, and you currently live in Richmond. Is that right?
So yes, when I stopped driving and then I quit my job, me and my brother lived together, and he was just like, look, you gotta take care of yourself. And my mom, she lived in Virginia because she works for the Department of Defense. So
Mm-hmm.
they had already moved her up here because they closed some army bases in Georgia. So I end up like selling my car and then just packing up, you know, everything I had and then moving up to Virginia because I couldn't really support myself anymore. It was really tough. So I
Yeah.
came up and stayed with my mom. And that was a challenge too, because you have to realize like you have your now adult son and come into like her space, and she doesn't recognize that you're almost kind of like when you have a certain disability, you're kind of reduced to a child for a certain period of time. But
Mm.
my mom, one thing I realized about my relationship with my mom is that she always relied on me, and I always been like the strength in my family.
Yeah.
And even though I was going through this situation, that relationship dynamic never changed. It needed to change to help me kind of maneuver this, but it never did. And that created a lot of problems
Mm.
in me dealing with this situation.
Yeah.
And that's what ultimately led me to kind of revisit like education, because I had to figure out what I was going to do, because I
Yeah.
couldn't really so much rely on my mom, because that relationship, it was hard for my mom not to see me as like super independent or see me as the son that she always knew me.
Yeah. So how old were you at this point when you moved in with your mom?
I was like 20, I was like 20, I want to say like 28,
Yeah.
27, 28. Yeah.
Right. And yeah, so I can imagine that, that's not easy, as an adult to move in. And as you say, I guess the dynamic was such that you were the strength, or, the person who it sounded like was, maybe a role model for your younger siblings or those kinds of things. And then maybe to have that dynamic change where your mom needed to be in a more of a support role. It sounds like that was a tough period.
Yeah, it was.
And so what prompted your interest, or how did you get into running?
That's funny. So I decided to go to school. That was a way for me to kind of get to fix my situation. I was living in Williamsburg and that was just nothing there. So I was like, you know what? I'm gonna, just jump out on a limb, and enrolled into VCU, and like luckily I got accepted.
Yeah.
And I ended up meeting a friend. I made a friend, and she went to the gym with me one day because I was like, I started getting into working out because she liked working out and she was the runner and I wasn't around. I was like, that's actually one of the times I had met her previously, and I was walking down the street and she had like her bib number on and everything. And I was like, girl, what are you doing? She's like, oh, I just came from the 10K, in like this like a very popular 10K that we have here. And I was like, you ran a whole 10K? I was like, how far is that? She's like 6 miles. I was like, girl, you are crazy. And and sure enough, like that one day in the gym, she was like, have you ever tried running? And I was like, no, I don't run. Just me being a guy's guy. Like we all just always go to the gym, we lift weights and we try to get all big and
right.
So she convinced me. She's like, oh no, try. She's like, she said she's seen people on TV that tie their hands together and they run shoulder to shoulder. And I was like, no way. And she was like, yeah. So we went and I took a shoelace out of my shoe and we kind of like tied her. I did it wrong at the time. Now, no, of course, now hindsight being 2020, we just tied our hands together and there was an indoor track upstairs. So I started jogging with her. Like we started kind of slow. We started jogging and I started to realize like, wait a minute. It's so one thing I have to backtrack and say about being blind, it's difficult because it impacts your mobility. You're stuck kind of like in a certain space with your cane. So you don't really make any like sudden or abrupt moves, or like you're not moving very fast. You're always kind of just limited to like the sweep of your cane in that kind of like space, that little box you're in, right?
Yeah.
So when we were running, like I realized it was such a freeing feeling to actually move that fast without being worried about hitting something, because she was there making sure I was good. And we just started running faster and faster. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, like this feeling feels amazing. It was it was so liberating. And after then, that one day, that one time I ran, I was absolutely positively like hooked on running because it gave me another level of freedom. I don't even want to say independence, but it just gave me so much freedom. I just didn't want to let it go. So we actually saw that there was a mile race, and she was like, "Hey, you want to sign up?" And I was like, "Yeah, let's do it. Let's do it." I've never ran a mile in my life, so I was open to it. But like all good friends, they flake on you, right? But it was almost the best. It was almost like the best thing that ever happened to me because it forced us to find this organization in Richmond called Sportable, and they are an organization that works with individuals with disabilities, right? So they specifically work with those type of individuals. So they end up sending out this guy named Carl, and he showed up at my house with like these little bitty booty shorts, and I was just like, oh man, like this is one of those real running guys. You're a real runner by how short your shorts are. That's so
he's true measure of any runner, I guess.
Yes. You're not a real runner if you got on like pants. Not a real runner. So him and I, we went out for a run, and same thing happened. I'm just like, oh my gosh, we ran even farther. We ran like a 5K, about 3 miles. We ran down by the river, and then just like I can't even explain it. It's so crazy. Just like being able to just get out and with my limited vision, even just see the sights and the trees and the river, and then just feeling all the feels of like the running and just your adrenaline and all the other things just flushing into your system as you're running. It was just something I was just hooked on. Yeah. And then I ran that race, and it just all, like I said, it all just completely made sense. Like the whole process, my process for life made sense.
This is kind of a hypothetical question, I guess, Antoine, but do you feel like had you started running when you had your vision, that you would have had the same feeling of freedom that you do or that you just described without your vision?
I don't know. I think I would say no, right? Because this is what would happen. This is exactly what would happen, is that I would be a fairly decent runner, and then I would lose my vision, and then I would feel some type of way about me losing my vision and then not being able to run. But it would take me some time to realize that, like, oh, I could just run with another person. So I would
Yeah.
go through this whole period of me being sad about being this, being something that I really wasn't. Because we do that to ourselves sometimes. We're like, oh, I had this. No, like, um, so I think that's what would happen. I think it would just add to the stress of, the whole process of losing your vision.
Yeah. And you described, I guess, or you indicated that, there's hesitation and bumping into things. And obviously when you have your sight or more sight, there's less of that hesitation. But is that something, I guess when you started running, that, that wasn't there anymore, or you said there's sort of, again, that kind of feeling of freedom, I guess, that yeah.
So yes and no. So the funny thing is, like, like, bad habits die hard. Like, it takes a long time to break those kind of habits. It depends on the environment and the space. One thing a growing pain that I had with running was my rigidity. And I didn't realize that I was like clenching or tightening, how you're always bracing for
Mhm.
impact and things like that. I was running like that. So guess what that caused? That caused me to have IT band issues, right? In
Yeah.
both legs. I had one is leg and this other leg, because I'm always like bracing, and I didn't have a very fluid form because I needed to relax. It just, let whatever happen. Stop trying to control the space, or stop worried about, hitting a pothole or doing this, doing that. It takes a long time for you to learn that you're okay. And I think that comes from also trusting who you're running with, trusting your guide. And that rapport takes time to develop. Unfortunately for me, it took a lot of, like, kind of, I don't call them injuries, but I call them boo-boos. A lot of boo-boos for me to recognize that I was doing that. But
Yeah.
after I did that, it helped a lot.
Yeah. Oh, your screen just went off, Anton. And there we go.
Yeah, there we
Um,
go.
so, and describe, I guess, how it works. So, like, how do you select a running partner? And when you're running, you mentioned earlier that when you first started, you talked about how you would kind of, um, I guess, connect, maybe have like a tie or something that connects you um, to another runner.
So for guy running in particular, there's a couple of things that need to happen. They need to be about your height, and also they need to be faster than you. Those are like the two most important things.
Right.
The third thing that I like to say, they have to be crazy, just as crazy as you are, right? Because it takes a lot sometimes. Some of the training that you do, it just takes somebody who's just like, all right, let's go. It can't be scared of doing certain things.
Yeah.
Like,
And
like in particular, I love to do box jumps, but immediately when they think about blind people and jumping onto boxes, people automatically like, wait, how do you do this? And I'm
yeah,
like, it happens.
yeah.
So
It's, having done some box jumps back in my amateur wrestling days, I know
yeah,
that's a vigorous exercise to do, but
yeah,
certainly when you're doing it with someone else, I'm sure that adds a whole other dimension to it.
yeah.
So yeah, maybe you can just talk a little bit more about your progression and some of your experiences running, I guess, from the time that you started, to get to the point where you're running in the Pan Am Games and Olympic trials and those kinds of things. How did you get from just starting out where you'd never done it before to that point?
So like I said, my first race was that race. It was a mile race here in Richmond. It was just like an out and back on Broad Street. during that race, I realized like a couple of things, like the built-in like metaphors for life, like running has in, or just running a race has in it. It's like for me, like I was able to break it down. I was like, all right, you get to the start line. Like, what did you do to get to that start line? Like, what actions did you take? You had to practice, right? You had to do all this preparation. You had to get socks, shoes, all these different things. You had to be very intentional about that to show up to the line. And then once you get to that line and that gun goes off, you you run and you try to mimic practice as much as you can, but really in actuality, practice goes out the window as soon as that gun go off. Right? Everybody starts out way too fast, and you end up like flying and kind of dying in the end.
Yeah.
But the one thing that it does teach you is like patience. Like you're always battling with your ability to be patient with yourself, be patient with your ability or your inability to do something. Just be patient.
Yeah.
And then when you cross that finish line, like just that act of like finishing something, like just finishing, because you realize, like I realized that the getting to the start line, even getting there, going to practice, being patient with myself, all of those things contributed to me actually finishing that one goal, like finishing whatever task I had.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get a medal, sometimes you don't. But the actual award in the whole thing is that you finished. So that just me breaking that down, and I use that same like kind of thought pattern structure for everything in life I want to do. I think that's how I've been able to accomplish so many things, because I look at it that very same way, whether it's school, whether it's track, whether it's whatever I'm trying to do, like that same thing. And I'm so lucky that my first race, I was able to learn it. I was just like, where has running been? Where has it been?
Yeah.
So once I got that kind of going, I started meeting different running buddies and stuff like this. And I have this one particular friend, his name's Taylor, and he's always been like a little brother to me. And he always kind of try to encourage me to do different things with him. And I try to support him as best as I can. And one day he was like, hey, I want to run a half marathon. And I was like, all right, yeah, you can have fun with that. Yeah. Because one thing I'll tell you, I don't know if you noticed this, but any races that have like a 5K, 10K, and then there's a half, and then a marathon start, the 5K, 10K, everything's fine. But then as soon as the marathon start, you always hear ambulances. And I'm like, that's for a reason, okay? There's a reason why that happens.
Yeah. Maybe humans aren't necessarily supposed to go these prolonged distances. You mentioned the injuries you've had.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. So he convinced me to do this race with him. So I was like, okay, I'll do it, because I'm just one of those people, like I try to support, especially people in our community, other visually impaired people, because I know the struggle, right? So I try to just be a supportive and be that friend that I always would want if, when I first started. Because, when I started, I was kind of alone. I was the only Antoine that I knew. So I try to be, there for other people. So he convinced me to run this race, and we have like this little friendly banter. It's like so he wants to beat me, and this is a distance that he very well could beat me in, but I'm not going to let anyone win. I'm going to give him a fair shake. I'm not going to just lay down for him. So he gets to the race. Somehow he gets in the starting. They wouldn't allow me to start with my wave. Something happened. I think I was late for my wave because I was warming up. So I had to start all the way back in like G wave with the grannies. And I was so upset that he had like almost like, I want to say like a 30-minute head start. So I'm like, oh my goodness, this is gonna be bad.
Yeah.
So I was like, all right, whatever. I just relaxed. So I was like, look, just pace myself, right? The patience. We learned this with all the races. So we learned the patience. So I get to the start line, like we go. And so I'm like, okay, let's find the kind of 2-hour pace. I think that's a decent pace for me to keep.
Yeah.
So I stayed with that wave. And eventually around like mile 3, guess what? We spot him, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm about to catch him. So like I catch him, and then I pass, and I'm like, no, come on. I see that he's kind of like just trotting along. He's really not like pushing himself. And I'm like, no, come with me. Like, let's go. And he's like, no, he didn't want to push himself too much. He was just going at like this 10-minute pace. And I knew he could do more, but I don't know what was going on with him. He wasn't injured or anything, but just maybe he just wasn't feeling it. Maybe the task was whatever. Yeah. So I ended up passing him, and I was like, fine, let's just eat the rest of this half marathon and see what we could do. So I did this, And right around mile 10, I started getting like, I don't even know this feeling. Have you ever ran a half marathon before?
I one time ran a marathon. I wouldn't call it running. It was more like a crawl. Yeah. I'm
Yeah,
not
I
built
just
like not built for long distance running, but I did do it on one occasion. Yeah.
yeah, you get to this point where you just feel like depleted.
Yeah.
And I never eat during runs. Like it's just something that's like it's just a ridiculous notion to me. So we end up passing like a cookie table, and like he had these big old chocolate chip cookies, and I ate one, and I'm like, okay, like, and I started feeling, I'm like, wait a minute, okay, I might be onto something. I
Yeah.
ate 3 cookies during this race, three
Uh,
of these big old cookies, and then sure enough, we kind of finished, and we came down the hill, and we get to the finish line, and we pass the finish line at 1:56, and I was just like, oh my goodness, and I'm like, is that good? They were like, yeah, you got under 2 hours for your first half marathon. That's really good. And I was like, so I never have to do this again? They're like, no, you never have to do this again. I was like, oh my goodness. And that was the one and only time I've ever run a half marathon.
yeah.
And that made me become a sprinter. I know that's a long story. So after that, I was like, only short distances from now on, never
Yeah.
again.
Yeah. After that experience, you realized, but you're where you wanted to focus your energies and efforts. Would
Yep.
you say, Anton, that sorry, Antoine, that um, you mentioned just kind of breaking uh, problems down into smaller pieces. Would you say running has helped you develop that skill?
Yes, for sure. Just like I told you, about the way I kind of look at races and I kind of apply that to life. For sure. And also, I don't really see things as like problems, if
Hmm.
that makes sense. I kind of just see them as like just challenges or some things to navigate or just a variable because a lot of times problems don't really even stop us. We stop us because things happen and things pop up, but it really never limits you. Like really the only thing that limits you is how you respond to that uh, issue. Sometimes we can get into catastrophizing things and we're just like, oh my gosh, this is always happens to me. This is so blah 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 blah. But if you if you just kind of look past those things, and I think the key to that is like setting a goal. If you already are looking like ahead and you have this overall goal, those little things, problems or issues that pop up are really not that big of a deal. And I think that helps you kind of keep your perspective on that. Just
Yeah.
just focusing on that goal. So you have to establish that goal. That's very, very important.
Yeah. Have you always had that perspective? I know earlier you said you've kind of always been like a strong individual and maybe like leader in your family. Is that sort of just part of who you are, or is that something that's been developed over time, maybe through life experience?
I would love to say yes, but no. Just the process of me going blind and the challenges with navigating my relationships with my family and all these years of psychology and being a master's student in clinical mental health, you're your first client, right? When you're going through the
Mm.
process, your purpose to you like, hey, don't diagnose yourself, but what do we all do? We open this book like, oh my gosh, I have this thing. And I think just doing so much work on myself and just trying to figure out like, okay, like what am I doing? Like, how am I navigating this? Or what's the most efficient way for me to navigate this? Or perspective taking is the biggest thing for me. I try to look at things from different angles or see the whole picture instead of just looking at the little bit. Because sometimes that's what gets us the most. It's like we'll run into an issue or a problem. And if we just take a step back and breathe for a moment
Yeah.
and then keep moving forward. So a lot of things just came about just from, my educational career and just experience, you develop
Yeah.
all that wisdom.
Yeah. So just speaking of your education, I know earlier in our conversation you were talking about how your vision and progressive loss of it was a limiting factor, and how that you didn't pursue schooling maybe as much as you might have, but now or the kinds of careers that you could have, that you were working in retail. Of course, there's nothing wrong with that, by any means, but now you're pursuing your master's degree, right? Is that in psychology?
Yes. So I'm working on my master's in clinical mental health counseling.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that's wonderful.
I plan on being a therapist and working my way up to get my certified my CMPC, which
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you're familiar with.
Oh, right, right. So it's specializing in sport psychology and I'm a certified mental performance consultant. Yeah.
Mhm.
And so yeah, I guess at what point did I guess earlier actually you mentioned that you went back to pursue your undergrad at VCU at Virginia Commonwealth. Is that right?
Mhm. Yep.
And so kind of what um, made that shift, or why did you think, okay, I'm going to go back to school, and what got you thinking in those terms and pursuing education despite some of your earlier experiences?
It was the vision loss mainly. Once I got to my mom's house, it took some time to like, okay, what am I going to do? Like, I really had to talk to myself, like, what am I going to do? Like, I can't work right now. I didn't have a cane at that time. I didn't know what an accommodation was. I didn't know what JAWS was. I didn't know what a screen reader was. I didn't know all these different things. Like, you're thrusted into a whole nother world that you know nothing about. So I really had to sit down, like, and figure out what was I going to do. And my girlfriend at the time, she was like, hey, well, why don't you go to school? And I'm like, no, no, no. I tried the school thing. Okay, it was
Yeah,
horrible. Like, I got out of school as fast as I could. Like, high school was it for me. Like, it was not even a thought for me to even go,
yeah,
because you're like, I didn't even do good at high school. Like, how the heck I'm going to make it through college? So I just didn't think I was adequate enough. Because even at the time, it wasn't a thought about like my vision being the problem with school. It was more, it was already defined in my head as I'm a bad student, right? I'm
yeah,
just not
yeah,
good at school. And I
yeah,
think that's one of the kind of like scary things that the vision loss did to me. It
yeah.
didn't, I guess I lost kind of confidence in other areas of my life as well.
Right.
And just really kind of just identify myself as a bad student or just not that smart or something
Yeah,
like that.
yeah. So it impacted your sort of feelings of self-worth. Uh,
Yeah,
yeah.
for sure.
And
And like I said, you don't realize when that's happening when it's happening, but it happens.
yeah. And so what has it been like in university? Obviously, to be accepted into a master's program, you must have been able to navigate and negotiate your undergraduate studies fairly successfully.
Yes, yes, and no. So when I first got into undergrad, of course, not being in school for so long, I don't think the content was the problem. The problem was my vision. Again, it kind of just reared its ugly head immediately as soon as I got into school. Like my first semester, I ended up on academic probation and I had like a 1.3 GPA. It was so bad. And the problem is that I had around like 6 to 7% of my vision. So I had like very small visual field, like
Yeah,
very narrow field of vision. And I was relying on it too much to read and all of these things. I was like really relying on my vision instead of me like completely committing to acting, like completely committing to like blind devices or things to support lack of vision. And
yeah,
I think that's like the hard part of having like blindness is slowly going like that. It takes you so long for you to convince yourself to like, hey, you're blind. Like you're blind. You need to act like you're blind. You need to behave like you're blind. You need to use blind stuff. You need to, you know, and it took me a long time to do that. And that next following semester, like I was like, okay, I'm gonna commit to the screen reader, and I learned how to use a screen reader. Actually, one of my first things I did was I rented an iPad from the library,
yeah,
and I was able to turn on the screen reader and just start playing with it. And I started kind of getting the hang of it. I was like, okay, now I can read this book like twice as fast as I would if I was trying to read it with my vision. Now I'm getting so good at the screen reader. Now I'm reading this book like 6 times as fast. Right. I can read this whole book in a fraction of the time. So
right.
now I'm getting better at doing things. Now I'm learning how to become an auditory learner. Like
Yeah.
And that alone kind of changed the way that I'm learning, the information I'm taking in, my memory's changing. I'm able to like repeat things and I'm becoming like a better short-term learner. So even those things, like I'm learning how to take tests, because if I read something maybe like an hour before a quiz, I retain so much of it because I have a really good short-term memory that I could just ace the whole test. I get straight Ace to the test.
Yeah.
But just learning that and going through that process takes so much time, and you kind of need help. You can figure that. I was lucky that I was able to figure some of that. I think just by the nature of me being in psychology, like God forbid if I had another, you know, kind of major, I probably would never learn some of the things I learned in psychology to kind of teach myself how to learn or teach myself how to navigate what I was dealing with.
Yeah. So I guess it sounds like, Antoine, it was difficult to accept this progressive loss of vision and maybe to see yourself in a different way. Once you started utilizing some of these technologies, do you feel like it opened up new avenues or doors for you?
Yeah, because now you go from like hiding and you're getting these to now you're the student in the front of the class, so raise your hand. Like, no, actually, the book says this, because now I'm able to consume the book. Most students aren't reading, that's just the
Yeah.
fact of the
Right.
nature.
Right.
And so now you're showing off a little bit in class, and then now you have all the confidence in the world. Now now the professor's talking to you in a different way, and you're giving you these opportunities, or even your counselors kind of like, oh my gosh, yes, Antoine, like this is an option for you. Have you thought about doing this? Have you thought about going to grad school? And I'm like, no, I don't want to go to grad school. This undergrad is definitely enough. This is like 4 years of my life. It was a lot. I'm done. Uh, so even that took a little bit of convincing for myself as well.
Yeah. I guess recently I've been just thinking about this idea that sometimes when people have the right kinds of support in place, that they can achieve all kinds of things that they might not otherwise be able to. I don't know if you have any comment or reflection on that, but it'd be great to
Yes,
hear.
no, for sure. I was lucky enough to have this counselor, and I cannot remember her name because I had so many of them would help me. But this one lady in particular, I was having her look over my resume because I was about to graduate. So I just was kind of crossing my T's and dotting my I's. And she's like, Antoine, the one thing, she's like, your resume is nice, but amazing. But she's like, the one thing that you need to focus on and that will take you places, like your education and job is like, yeah, it's only going to get you this far. But like, she's like, but this one thing is going to take you like way farther than you could ever imagine. And that's your running. She's like, you need to spend more time and focus more on developing this running because it's going to take you places. And
Yeah.
she told me this in my undergrad, and it's kind of like giving me chills now. Like, it's so crazy that like she saw she saw it before I even realized. And I was like, no, okay, I'm out here running 5Ks and 10Ks for fun, but she's literally saw the whole picture. And sure enough, fast forward to this day, I've done all these amazing things because I took her advice and I focused on my running. And I've been out of the country. I've ran all over this country and just kind of accumulated all these accolades, and I've been able to talk to children and become a fairly decent public speaker, which is something I never thought I would be able to do, but it's something I love. So
Yeah.
Thank goodness to me running into her and her being able to have a foresight to kind of tell me to develop that. So
Yeah.
that's kind of the big reason why I'm here.
So maybe you can talk a little bit about your training at the moment, and you mentioned goals, and having goals seems like it's important for you. So what are some of the maybe you can describe kind of like a typical training day and what some of your current goals are for the future.
Okay. So after this year, not making it to Tokyo, I I had a struggle with kind of like bouncing back after that,
Yeah.
because it's such a big loss. And it took me a little bit of while. It took me about a month to actually get out of that, like get out of that funk and like dust myself off and
Yeah.
just get back to training. But I did have to kind of give myself a goal. It's like, we have world championships next year, which is in Oregon. So, that gives me an opportunity to compete and still accomplish, goals and still do what I want to do, like I don't know, I just had to take a step back and just kind of like re-evaluate everything. But luckily I was able to kind of get that like kind of in order. So I started training maybe like 3 weeks ago. And right now I'm kind of running. I'm attaching myself to an e-bike, and I've been running about 4 miles to try to get my cardio up because I'm going to start running the 400 this year,
Yeah.
which is like my natural position. But it's really hard for me to find people that can run that distance with me. But luckily this year I have a new guy runner. His name's Jason. He's actually a 400 runner. So I think that's part of my story too, is I'm really limited to the type of talent that I can find in my area, because it's
Yeah.
really hard to find people that can hop up off the couch and run 11 second 100 meters,
Yeah. Yeah.
or that doesn't. So you really just have to find. It's really takes time to kind of find the right person. So luckily, I found Jason. So we have been training for the 400. So
Right.
this week I go to the gym, lift weights. I do like a full body lift. And then I love to finish with the Stairmaster just to torture myself. And
It is repetitious, if nothing else. You can get
yeah,
a good sweat going.
for sure. And
Yeah.
like I said, I put my blind vest on and I go out, and we have we have this really nice trail called the Capitol Trail,
Mhm.
and it's like right beside the river. So I run out there, and my friend, they take the e-bike, and that's not kind of only way they can keep up with me. And then I could just run with my hands tied to their hand on the e-bike.
Yeah.
And that's always fun. And people are always stopping me trying to take Instagram pictures and stuff like that. So
Right. Right. So are you focused on the World Championships in Oregon?
yes, that's
What
my next goal.
and what's the process that you use for setting goals? Do you have sort of long-term goals? Is it more like one particular goal that you set and then you set another goal, or do you have a series of goals?
So yes, I have a series of goals, but really I like to try to evaluate what's not to be like all fantastical or cliche, whatever, but I try to evaluate like what's in my heart, like what do I
Mhm.
feel? Because for me, and a friend kind of brought this up the other day. She was like, because when I was in class, I was like, oh, I like running. I was introducing myself, and I was like, hey everybody, my name is Antoine, and I like running and this and that. And one of my classmates, she kind of called me out. She's like, hey Antoine, um, you saying you like running is kind of an understatement. She called me out in front of the whole class, and I was like, is an understatement. She's like, why don't you kind of like tell everybody like who you are? So I was like, okay, well I told them I'm like a Paralympian and whatever, this stuff like that. And then the class was like, oh wow, like they were like amazed by this. So I said it to say like the ultimate goal was if the ultimate goal was to be accomplished, I've already accomplished that, right? I have a ton of medals. I've gotten the title of Paralympian. Like, do I need to win? Do I need to win one? I don't know. I think the biggest problem that I have right now is that I think going through so much of this struggle, like early on in my life, I feel like that at some point I felt like I was left behind, by my peers, by like my family. Like everyone's getting married, everybody's moving on with their life, but I kind of had to start my life completely over from scratch, if that
Yeah.
makes sense.
Yeah.
So it kind of put a little bit of pressure on me to try to catch up, catch up, catch up, catch up. But at the same time, a lot of my friends look at my life like they want my life, but I'm sitting
Yeah.
here thinking that I'm behind or something, you
Right.
know?
Right.
So it's taking me time, even this something I'm kind of dealing with now. Like it's taking me time to realize, like, oh, you're living life. This is your life. Like, what are you pushing? What do you continue to stop pushing so hard? The rest is like icing on the cake. Like
Yeah.
you are living a great life.
Yeah. I guess
And
people tend to think there's, these sort of traditional milestones, right? By this age, I want to have this, or
Right.
be married or have kids or whatever. Like some of these typical markers, or I guess maybe benchmarks. But
Right. We have
it
all these
sounds,
like social constructs of like age, and they play such a big part into it, and things like where we should be, and it's so that even that's been tough for me to just navigate.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
but I luckily I like lately I've been just enjoying the process. Like I would say like the last year or so, I've been really just enjoying the trips, enjoying the process, enjoying the traveling. Like that's who I am. Like this is my life. Like this is what I do. Like even if I'm not competitive, I think I will continue to run because I have, I am part of a master's group here.
hmm,
So that's older individuals who run
yeah,
track. And
yeah,
even me finding them, it kind of helped me change my perspective. It's like, no, we run because we love running. So even beyond me competing, like what am I running from? Am I running to chase medals? Or am I just running to like for life?
yeah,
So I think that's what I've accepted, that I'm like running for life. So anything that I get on top of that is just icing on the cake. So
right,
just allow myself that grace to just exist without having to push.
yeah. It sounds like you're, I guess just thinking about your motivations for participation, which maybe change as you shift from being, an elite competitor to, maybe just running for different reasons. What are some of the things that, and you've talked already about some of this, but what are some of the aspects of being a Paralympian that you find rewarding or satisfying, or maybe just being a runner more broadly?
Man, I am a local celebrity. It is the coolest thing. Everybody always wants to take a picture. Everybody wants
Uh,
to all these different things. Just getting used to the attention is kind of cool.
yeah,
There's so many benefits. I don't know. I find that just being a Paralympian, it's it's tough because we need so many resources to kind of make what we do happen.
yeah,
And it just takes a lot, like a lot from not just from me, like my success is dependent on another person. So even that task in itself takes a lot of mm, it takes a lot of work for me to traverse.
yeah, yeah,
But just the overall experience as being a Paralympic athlete. The crazy thing is before I lost my vision, I didn't even know this was a thing. Right. I think I was kind of like everyone else, like they believed that the Special Olympics was like, for disability, because Special
uh,
Olympics marketing is like far better than the Paralympics marketing. So
yeah,
I think their message has reached more people. So I thought like, oh, like Special Olympics, so individuals into intellectual disabilities, but I thought it was
yeah,
all, everybody was the Special Olympics. But now that I know better, um, so now that I'm doing it, it's created this, I don't know, it's created this identity that I have, will help me develop my identity, that it's kind of, I don't really have, like you were saying about problems. I don't really foresee many problems because you develop this identity because you have this like cape on, because you've
yeah,
accomplished so many goals, you have accomplished all these things, you've done this, you've done that like, oh, regular life is just like, oh, it's easy, you
yeah.
know.
So does that, do all of those accomplishments, and as you just said, regular life becomes easy? I, I mean, I could only imagine that, um, particularly maybe in the earlier stages when you, um, no longer essentially have vision, that all of these things that people with sight, take for granted, right? Like you mentioned, not sort of stumbling into a pothole, or, we're such a visual society, and to kind of
Mhm.
navigate the world, for many of us, we rely so heavily on our sight. So, um, I guess my question is, do the accomplishments that you've had, does that somehow, mitigate, or reduce in some ways maybe the day-to-day challenges of kind of I don't know, all the maybe small little things that others take for granted that might be challenging, but that you don't necessarily see as challenging because you've accomplished a lot of different things? Or yeah, I don't know if there's a question in there.
I think so. I think I kind of know what you're getting at. I think so. Because I have other friends that have disabilities, right? But they don't participate in like sport like I do, or
Yeah,
at the level that I do. So you can kind of see them still struggling with just the process of like coping with it, of dealing with it, or
yeah,
like what stage are they in. So I think for me, sport has given me that the ability to fast forward to those emotions, because it, what it is, it's just like in psychology, like when you're introduced to like another stressor, like uh, a lesser stressor no longer becomes relevant because that bigger stressor now takes precedent, right? So
mhm,
so instead of me focusing on like, okay, these streets are hard to cross, like I don't feel that these streets are hard to cross anymore, because like one of the toughest things, especially as an athlete, is like you get to the you get to Lima, Peru, and you get to Paraguay, and you line up at the line, and it's like it's 59 degrees outside, and you have nothing on but like, some little thin shorts and a little thin top, but you gotta like focus, right? And you're just like, you got like 30,000 people like cheering, and you're just like, oh my God, this is a lot. This
yeah,
is a lot. And that's a feeling, that's a level of stress, or yeah, stress that like many people don't get to experience.
right,
But you can see how that definitely belittles, like, okay, I want to go to 7-Eleven and I want to get some ice cream, and
yeah,
that's not a challenge. But for a person who never had that experience, you go like, you get the other perspective, like, oh, I wish it was easier for me to get up and walk to 7-Eleven to get
yeah,
ice cream,
yeah,
because it's kind of challenging.
right. So do you experience, Antoine, frustrations over some of those, let's say, smaller things like, okay, I want to walk to the grocery store, or I want to, pick something up, or are those kinds of day-to-day tasks, are those a challenge, or are they just things that now I guess are so sort of normal to your existence?
They were, but after the pandemic happened, it created like like an exacerbated like kind of like
Mm,
situation for me. Because I don't know if you notice about blind people, we touch everything.
yeah,
We just love to touch everything because it's just that's how we got ourselves. Walls, we're just, and it's just this has not been a particularly safe time for us,
yeah,
or for me, because it's been really tough. I've been needing a little more assistance, because another thing that happens, which is, it's just, you have to take it, that's how society is right now. But people love to help me. So people end up grabbing me a lot. Or like if I'm trying to walk or try to cross the street, like, oh, you need some help. Let me help you. And they
yeah,
grab
yeah,
you and they help you. And I know it's like, I can't react to it.
yeah,
Like, it's
yeah,
just, people are being helpful.
yeah. It's
But
well intentioned.
yeah, but at the same time, during a pandemic, how many times do you really want to be touched by
Yeah,
strangers?
yeah, sure, yeah, sure. Yeah, I
So
completely get you. Yeah,
yeah, so it's been a challenge and a half, and I have been needing more support from family, and needing family to kind of step up and help me out. Um, but then you realize that that kind of support isn't there. Then what do you do?
mm,
And then
mhm,
luckily technology is helping. So I use a lot of apps now to get my groceries and stuff delivered. A
yeah,
lot of technology has helped so much, so much.
yeah,
Because I didn't have these things when I first started losing my vision, but now like you can get anything delivered today,
right.
which is fantastic. So yes, there are a lot of challenges, but you just got to be creative and try to navigate them. You can't see them as problems or get stuck as problems. It's just an opportunity to be creative. That's
Yeah,
how I see it.
yeah. Um, yeah, it sounds like over time you've developed, as you said earlier, perspective on things, and you mentioned earlier patience. maybe you can just speak a little bit more about the role of patience, which I think for most of us is a challenge, right? Like, how does that help you either in sport or just life in general?
So, like anyone will tell you, like when it comes to like training, like the most important thing is to be consistent. But it's so hard because once you set a goal for yourself, you want it now. And everyone wants to take shortcuts. Like you want to be the fastest person now. You got to do this now. For me, it took ever since the Rio Olympics. It took from then, which is about like 4 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago. It took from then to even now for even me to develop my body into a body that can even handle the type of training I've been doing.
Yeah.
One thing you don't even realize is that, like, no, it's not just from like running fast to fast. No, you have to like develop those muscles. And now all of that stuff takes time. And that's one thing that I didn't know. I started to learn, like, no, so you have to be patient with yourself. You got to be patient with the process, trust the process, just take it a day at a time today, and then do what you got to do today, then do what you got to do tomorrow. If you take that approach, you can stay consistent. Like if you just focus on that one day and just be patient,
Yeah.
focus on that one day, do what you can do, and just keep stacking them on top of each other. And then you'll look back, you're like, man, I am so uber consistent. And that's one of my personality traits that people equate to me, saying, oh my gosh, you're so consistent. Like, how are you? I'm like, no, I just try to do what I could do every day. Just that day. I just don't think about the day before. I just try to think about today,
Right.
and my bigger goal, and that's it.
Right. So kind of just keeping what's in front of you as your focus, or like that particular in the moment, like what's my training session? What do I need to do to maximize this training session? Or
yeah, for sure. Because if somebody wrote down your workout and you look at it, like all those little boxes in the little schedule, like, yeah, it would intimidate you. So if you just take a day, like say, like after I get off this podcast, like if I say like, okay, I'll just do some sit-ups, and then I end up doing push-ups, and then I end up doing some squats. It's like, bam, I took advantage of that. And now I've stacked 2 days in a row because I ran yesterday. I ran 4 miles yesterday. So
yeah,
that's kind of just how you do it. Just take that one day at a time. Don't look at the whole burrito. Just take a little nibble.
Right. Oh, that's a good analogy. Yeah. And on that note, Antoine, I guess just one last question. That you've obviously experienced a lot of challenge, but have managed to accomplish some wonderful things in your life as well. So I'm wondering if you can share any suggestions or wisdom for people who might be going through challenges, and thoughts on, I guess, how to deal with their adversity, whatever that might be.
So, I think the key is, if you're, newly having, a challenge or facing adversity, or you now acquired a disability or an inability to do something, I'll say that the biggest thing you should do is just don't focus on the loss. Like, try to find, there's always a benefit to everything, like, yeah, my vision was taken away. Even someone asked me the other day, and it's like, Antoine, like, would you want your vision back? I'm like, at this point, like, I don't think so. Like, I don't think so. Like, it's kind of my superpower now. And I think that's the biggest thing that you have to learn whenever you have a disability. You have to learn that thing is not a detriment to your life. It adds something to your life. Like, whether you function from your attic or your basement, right? But when it pertains to anything in life, like how are you functioning from, like, yes, vision loss can be tough, but at the same time, it can be something to open up so many doors. You just have to step through it. It opened up a whole wealth of opportunity, but you have to allow yourself to see that opportunity and take advantage of it. And you won't be able to accomplish anything unless you change your perspective on what has happened to you. So I would say just be patient with yourself, forgive yourself. That's important too. Forgive yourself. Don't blame yourself. Don't why me, and just recognize that you have so much to kind of give to other people, even if you don't feel as though that you could do anything for yourself. Like, just take some time and try to do something for others, and you'll start to realize like that one thing, it'll help build your self-confidence, because people don't see you how you see you. People see you as like the purest form of yourself. They don't see how you intend to present yourself, and then you can learn a lot from that.
Yeah. Those are wonderful words. Would you say, are there things that maybe help people shift away from that focus on seeing something as a loss, like maybe if it's loss of vision, or I guess maybe to frame that differently, like what helps people to reframe something so that they can give themselves the opportunity to maybe experience some of the hidden or underlining benefits of an experience?
I think the first place you got to start is talking to other people who are in a different process. Because one of the mistakes that I made was that when I first lost my vision, I went onto Facebook and I tried to find like these groups of other people with retinitis pigmentosa. And the one thing that I found, it was just kind of like this echo chamber of like complaining, and like, it's like they all were kind of stuck in the same stage together. And I started to notice like, no, this can't be it. Like, we can't be. It's like, so I would say the first thing you should do is reach out to anyone who is doing something that you deem like amazing, or something that you didn't think you were capable of, something that you would like to be. Just reach out to that person and talk to them and ask them how, like, those are the questions I get, all of those Antoine how questions. Just ask them those how questions, and I'm pretty sure they're very used to getting those questions, because I get them almost every day. And just connecting with that person, and you just have to find a mentor, someone to help you kind of navigate your own challenges. It'll be hard for me to make kind of like a blanket statement, because everyone has their own unique challenges when it comes to, like, my blindness is going to be different than someone else's blindness.
Sure.
And
But I think that's such an interesting point, Antoine, about if you reach out to people who may be venting the same frustrations, or maybe they're sort of currently going through the same kinds of things, that in some ways sort of this conventional wisdom, venting is cathartic, or maybe there's certainly some value in having people listen to you or hear you and understand you. But on the other hand, if you're all kind of just voicing frustrations and there's nothing else beyond that, then not surprisingly, you may not actually feel all that better after just releasing frustration after frustration. And so, like finding people, it almost seems like you're suggesting finding maybe people who are a little bit on the other side of things, who are maybe have already experienced the possibility of some of the upsides of maybe a disabling experience or traumatic event, or whatever the case may be, that those people are better positioned to help you see the how. Is that right?
Yes, for sure. And I think that's the best way to go about it. Because even a skill that I learned of, like, venting is great, but like the best way to vent is like grab a partner and you guys go on a 3-mile run and you guys talk about life, and you vent then, and that way you can go through the process of like, all right, you vented, but like, what's your next step? And just having that person have that level of like knowledge to give you that intentionality of like putting that extra step in of like, okay, now what? It's like, okay, you complained, now what's the solution? And I think that's the most important.
That's awesome. I've really enjoyed speaking with you, Antoine, and again, thank you for your time, and certainly wish you all the best with your master's studies and your future athletic endeavors. Great to be with you.
Thank you. It's nice speaking with you as well. Nice meeting you.